This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. In the great principle of universality, we will say that this is the morning, it is the evening, it is the afternoon, and we'll all take our chances on what time of day it is. At this point, it is good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Jeremy.
And we are meeting this morning with a podcast on fear. Now, this podcast is being brought to you by the voice of Respectonomics, which is me, Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley, and Sarah, you are the co-host. And I think you're going to be chiming in quite a lot on this one because it deals with the fear that exists in corporate life. That's what we wanted to be addressing. Now, the headline name for this podcast is Vaccinating the Fear. In other words, we need a vaccine for fear because fear is very crippling. It's the worst case of measles. It's the worst case of COVID. We need to have a vaccination for it. I started off with the expression fearless. And that, of course, gets you into trouble because you think of fearless of people who go running in and doing things without fear. What this is designed to do is to bring to us that idea of fearing less. I think to eliminate fear for one's vocabulary is probably ridiculous. I don't think you can do that. But at the same time, we want to give people the opportunity to fear less.
Correct. And fear for people or levels or intensity of fear is different for different people. Right?
Absolutely. And we're going to be talking about one particular dimension of fear. The fear I'm not talking about, and I believe you're not talking about either, is the fear when you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger.
Correct.
At that point, you would be absolutely terrified. Your adrenaline would be in full bore, and you'd be running your socks off.
That has not happened to me. However, I can have an understanding of the nature of the fear that I would have if it was.
Have you ever been feared by a raging bull?
No, a goose.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be proud of that.
They are nasty.
I know they can be.
But they're protective.
But that's that kind of it. And I'll tell you the other fear we're not talking about, one we've addressed before. It's in one of our podcasts, we talked about the fear of success.
Yes.
We're not talking about those fears that we have learned and are part of our makeup that we want to really get rid of. That's not the fear we're talking about. The fear this morning that I'd like to address is that fear that in the workplace, but having said the workplace, I think it's in far more places than we care to admit. And that place of fear that I'm talking about is that fear that you have that feeling of, am I going to be next? And it can come in different forms and shapes. It can be in the corporate world, it's very easy. One of your cohorts just got let go, and you have the fear of, am I going to be next?
Right.
There's fear of disease. There's fear of financial collapse. There's all kinds of fears that we can, I think, are all, well, you said earlier, it's very personal, and the intensity of each of those fears is different in each person. But it's that fear that I want to talk about this morning.
Okay.
Or this afternoon, depending on who's listening when.
Right.
Let us be correct. I think the first thing I'd like to point out is the fear, and I'm going to concentrate on corporate life here, and I'm not saying that it's because it's only in corporations. I think it's very much more specific. It's very much more understandable. I think it's more universal, the sense of fear in the workplace. And I'm not talking about...
I want to highlight. It's just an arena you would like to highlight.
I think so. But I think I want to emphasize that this highlight is one that extends like a picture. It goes into all parts of our living. And I think the first thing that bothers me about this fear is how deceptive it is. That it's almost like it's out there. You feel it, you know it, you can recognize it, you see it in other people, they see it in you. But there's a sort of deception going on because the leadership will always say, we've got your best interests. And at your heart of hearts, you know they don't. that the organization in many cases uses people sort of robotically, like automatons, and they go and they go and they come and they come. And then the other part to the fear puzzle is that fear that is instilled is considered to be a useful way to run the business,
Mm.
which
Do you think leaders are actually aware that they are let me rephrase that. Do you think that some leaders are aware that they are operating from that space, or do you think it's culture driven?
I think it's culture driven. And the reason is because fear is, there must be an adjective for this, but it's a case of osmosis. And what
Okay.
I mean by that is we imbibe that spirit of fear. If you're frightened, I'm frightened. And I
Mm,
think one of the problems is that senior officers, directors, leaders in corporations, governments, and so on, they themselves deal with a lot of fear. Not,
absolutely.
not the healthy fear, but that fear of, when am I going to get caught out? Is somebody going to take away my shield and realize that I really have screwed up? When are people going to come and say, hey, you should be treating people better?
Mhm.
When's the cover going to be blown, in other words?
I also think in some cases there is also a level of fear for leaders themselves from either owners, shareholders,
Absolutely.
things like that. So they may be also operating
Hmm.
their business from a place of fear themselves,
Absolutely.
right?
And this is what I'm saying. Not only are you frightened of your cover being blown, but you're frightened of all the demands that are being put upon you, whether it's
Yes.
by the board of directors or by the press, by the social media.
Yep.
We're all living under this sense of, coercion, and we are frightened. And with that fright, we extend it. There must be an adjective for osmosically. There's no, it isn't. But
I'm not sure on that one.
no, nor am I. I can't even get Latin or Greek onto that one.
It infuses
Okay,
into
infuses.
no.
That's the word. That's it. But it
Mhm.
does. It's like putting a tea bag in the sauce in a teapot. It
Right.
diffuses, and so does fear. So I think what we need to do is to address, first of all, the nature of the way in which the fear comes in. The next thing we need to understand is, what does fear do for you? Because it's, at one level, it sort of almost says it's my impetus, it's what I do to get the job done,
Mhm.
a sort of timeline theory, I suppose. But the truth of the matter is, it's suffocating.
Right.
It's depressing. It creates loneliness. It creates distrust. I'm not actually sure where I can even read a sort of a good sign, except for one thing.
Mm.
A friend of mine, in fact, he's part of the Dignity Trust. His name is Bill, and
Mhm.
he is a retired veteran of the Royal Canadian Air Force.
Okay.
And he talks about fear. And there are
Mm.
two things that he brings to the table. One is that a pilot is taught to understand every condition and how they should respond to every condition. So, in other words, preparation becomes the antidote to being frightened. And that just means, in other words, a lesson to us all is this concept of being prepared.
It
And
becomes
although that,
habit.
I beg
When
your
it's
pardon?
over and over and over and over again, it becomes habit. So it's a
Exactly.
to react that
Mm.
way.
But being prepared has an interesting sidebar to it. You're in the business of real estate. I was in the business of wealth management. And you and I both know how important it is to be prepared. And a
Yes.
bizarre statistic is that if people spend 5 days of the week for half an hour each
Mhm.
day studying their business, studying their business doesn't mean reading the local newspaper. It can
Right.
be studying the aspects of, in your case, real estate um, disparities in different regions or something.
Right.
But if you do this half hour a day, 5 days a week, do you realize that that puts you in the top 5% decile range of knowledge in your industry?
Mm.
What it means is people do not spend a lot of time
Right.
preparing. And looking at it another way, if we go back to the pilot, if he is prepared for every condition, he has a far better way of knowing when a difficult condition arises. In our case, we're talking about fear, but has a
Right.
much better ability to counter it and to deal with it. So
Right.
being prepared, I think, is something we should all be mindful of. But Bill has one other comment, and that is this, that under the heading of fear, it's also very important to know when to be afraid.
And how do you decipher when to be afraid and when not to be afraid?
I'm almost going to give you a cavalier answer and say I think it's experiential. I think to
Mm,
be able to identify the situation for which, you will be surprised, almost by definition, you can't.
I was gonna say because how do you
Yeah,
predetermine,
you can't.
right?
So that's okay. I think the question still needs to be asked, how do you know? And when you come back with, you don't, that in
Right.
itself is a very important dynamic to understanding that fear is something that can come and catch you out at any time.
Right, it
So
can catch you off guard, but I think
catch you off guard.
sometimes you can almost I don't wanna say plan for it, but what I mean by that is you may have a sense of fear, let's just say you're going in for a performance review,
Right,
and you're concerned, you know that your numbers are not where they need to be, or you're
right.
not meeting a quota, or
Yeah,
you're not meeting metrics, and so ahead of time, you already have that sense of a level of fear
yeah,
or hesitation in terms of going into that
yeah.
conversation or dialogue, so that might be an example where you are aware of it prior to.
Absolutely. And that's a very good example because in that case, what you would do is you would identify the fear of going into this particular meeting. You do it, I do it in any sales world. There's always that part of your fear, but going in prepared and
Yes.
having cogent ideas about what you want to talk about, what you want to express is a
Right.
valuable insight.
Right.
So I think we've beaten up on being prepared and the
Yes.
risks of the incident coming along from left field. The the other part to it is that the flight instructor is very big on is the risks of being careless. So
Mm,
if in fact you and I are not, what should we say, paying attention. In other words, if we are being careless,
right.
if you don't tie up your shoelaces, which is careless, you stand the risk of landing on your face.
Right.
So, in other words, being careless is an attitude, it's part reality, pragmatic, but it's also something that we need to be philosophically aware of. Am I being careful? Perfectly fair question. So we've talked about preparation. Now we're talking about a bit about being uh, caring for oneself. The other thing I want to talk about is the warning flashes. There are those times we come into incidents absolutely, as you said a moment ago, from left field. You just didn't see it coming. But there are red flashes from time to time. And those red flashes are worth paying attention to. We don't have to become absorbed or obsessed with them, but they can be ticklers in the wind. They can be the clues to the fact that we need to be afraid.
So is it an awareness?
It's an awareness. Respectonomics, as you know, is one of its profound positions is to be aware. So we're
Right.
talking about the awareness of fear. We're talking about the different kinds of fear, and we're talking about how do we handle them. We've talked about preparation. We've talked about the red flashes and so on. But I'm now going to take us down to another path because in all of our times that we've talked, we've always said, what is the next step?
Yes.
Recognize the fear in the workplace. It's almost like taking off the cover of the garbage can and looking in and saying, my goodness, there's a lot of fear in there. So we
Mhm.
need to find out ways, how do we disentangle that fear from our lives? Because
Right.
I think we can all agree very quickly that it's unhealthy. And by the way, unhealthy doesn't mean just meaning I don't come out with good ideas, I don't come out with good corporate initiatives and so on. I think it's also hurts at the very heart of one's medical integrity. In other words, how many people do you know who suffer from all kinds of diseases and ailments and whatever that are actually created out of a spirit of fear?
Well, and not only that, thinking of it, from a little bit more from a corporate vantage
Mm.
point as well, is if you're not looking after the culture or the environment, or that, I guess we'll call it the fear factor for lack
Mhm.
of better,
Right.
you're not looking after that. You're actually risking, as you're saying, employees being impacted from a health standpoint. You're now then navigating short-term disability
Good point.
and potentially, as a result of work environment.
Yeah.
I certainly came across those experiences in the HR management days where people went off on leave as a result of
Of
what they were identifying as a result of, for example, a stress leave as a result of the work environment or what
yeah.
have you. So, it opens up a completely
Right.
different myriad of
Yes.
challenges, right?
So the whole mission this morning is the aspiration is to close the door on unnecessary fear.
So how do we do that?
Ah, the next step. And I've divided this into now, Respectonomics has been very clear on one point. The human being is made up of three components.
Yes.
And everybody says, well, not quite so fast. Yes, we are. We are made up of a body. That's what is. Can you see it in your screen now? The body?
Yes.
That's the body of Jeremy and I. You can see the body of Sarah. That's the body. There's the mind, which is where we process each other's information and develop ideas and so on. And then there's that inner being that that everybody's got their own personal word for it. You've emphasized that the spirit of fear is different for each person.
Yes.
And I agree with that. I think it's also fair to say that that inner being is also extremely confidential, extremely private. It's personal. I don't think it's a big enough word for it, actually, but it
Right.
belongs to the individual. And therefore, when we say the inner being, whether we call it the spirit, the heart, or the soul, I don't think we should get caught up on the etymology of that. What we should get caught up on is the absolute understanding of our tripartite nature.
Right.
And I'm going to give you one bit of Latin here. You cannot get away
We
from
are
it.
ready. We will never deny you.
Okay, don't roll your eyes. There it
Did I do
is.
that?
No, we are tripart beings. But if we bring those three parts together, we then become triumvirates. We
Mm.
become victors. We become triumphant.
Mhm.
And the word triumvirate includes the word strength, vires for strength. So
Mm.
the bringing those three to a position of strength is a way in which we fulfill the greatest aspirations that any human being can have. So this business of getting rid of the fear is a way of letting loose those three incredible opportunities we have in our own humanity.
Right.
Is that fair?
That's fair.
All right. So let's go to the three steps.
All right.
Okay. Now, the first one doesn't need a drum roll. The first one is the body. And the first thing with the body, and you and I experience this a lot, and that is we communicate with other people,
Mhm.
body to body. The business loves having people back at work. There's a truth to that. But the
Mhm.
better truth is this, and that is small groups are very powerful. The
Right.
Dignity Trust, of which you and I are, well, we are members. The Dignity Trust, which is the small group behind Respectonomics, is one of the most powerful groups I have ever belonged to because
Mm.
it allows free thought. It is safe. It is, there's no defense. There's no offense. There's no judgment.
No judgment. Yeah.
Nope. And it really goes to the heart of what, you ready for another Greek one?
Ready.
One more. Plato, calling Plato said that the purpose of good debate is to apprehend the truth.
Mm.
So all we're trying to do as a small group is to apprehend the truth. So there's no sense of you said it or I said it.
Right.
It's irrelevant. What is
The collect
relevant is collectively to come up with the best idea we can. So the bodily function of getting people together in small groups is very powerful. Organizations are terrible at setting up small groups. They're brilliant at setting up committees,
Mhm.
which is not the same thing. That gets one of those ghastly corporate check marks. Yes, we've got a committee that's looking into safety or something. No, I'm talking about a small group where any idea can be floated. and the person who might be polishing the front doorstep is sitting down with the chief financial officer, where you can exchange ideas. By the way, one of the other advantages of that mix and match hierarchically is the definition of a good general or a bad general. A bad general doesn't know his troops. A good general knows his troops.
Mhm.
Knowing your troops is a pretty powerful.
Knowledge is key.
Knowledge is key, but knowing your troops
Mhm.
takes that knowledge to another degree. So that deals, shall we say, with the issue of the body.
Ah,
Where the mind is concerned, I learnt this last week from a young lady. I think she's 12 years old, and she was giving a speech at our grandson's school. There was a
okay.
speech competition, and her speech was on gratitude.
Very
And
nice.
at first blush, I thought, oh, we're going to hear all the reasons for saying thank you and please and all that, which of course is correct. But she went on to point out two things. The first one was that when we express gratitude one to another, and I know you do this, and I
Mhm.
certainly practice it, and that is when we express thanks and gratitude, it, believe it or not, changes the neurochannels in one's brain. In other words, it changes one's own mental composition. You are self-creating a happier person, a more buoyant person, a less depressed person, a more outwardly thinking person.
Mm.
It's a lovely antidote to fear. But she also pointed out, and this is where we're going to go to for the third one, because she also pointed out that today many people feel out of control and
Mhm.
many people feel trapped. And
Interesting.
if you exactly now, this is coming from a 12-year-old,
Mhm.
and I think you and I have already talked about bringing her in to the podcast because I think she's got some very important young person's
Mhm.
information and insights.
Active, yeah.
Yeah. But the part I want to then say is, and it took me a little time to figure this out, that if we're going to get into the business of I feel out of control and I feel trapped, then I can take a look at my inner being. Do you call it inner being, soul, spirit, heart? What's your favorite word?
Um, I think I would say soul, or I mean
Okay.
soul or inner being. I don't think I
Yeah.
have. I probably use a myriad
Okay.
of
Well, let's
terms.
use the word soul.
Yes.
Okay. If my soul is out of control and if my soul is trapped, we have one incredible self-controlled, self-started, self-initiated ability to turn that around.
Mhm.
And that is to forgive other people.
Mm.
Now, it's a very difficult thing to do. And that
It's
but therein lies its truth. If it's difficult to do, it's almost like saying, if it's difficult, it must be worth it. And it's worth looking at forgiveness. Forgiveness does not mean, can we be very clear on something? Forgiveness does not mean denying accountability,
Mhm.
nor does it mean that you suddenly restart the trust button and say, oh, yes, now I trust you. No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means that we are forgiving the person because, under the heading of forgiveness, what I'm actually doing before that is allowing the pain and the agony, the abuse, the exploitation, all of those words that have created this spirit of anger and resentment and vindication within ourselves, all we're doing is allowing it to fester.
Right.
It,
Do you think it's forgiveness? I'm gonna put a little. Do you think it's forgiveness of the person, or do you think it's forgiveness of a behavior from a person that we are forgiving?
I think it's forgiving the person
Mhm.
because the behavior is where we expect the accountability and where we say, if you want this, my forgiveness to be expressed in you, your job is now to recreate the trust points so that I can now trust you.
Mm. Do you think sorry,
Now,
do you
go on,
think
please.
the forgiveness, though, is so sort of to that point there where you're saying, then you can kind of rebuild trust again. Do you think that people focus on forgiveness so that they can rebuild that trust? Or do you think that people forgive so that it is more at peace or comfort or in alignment with their soul for them?
Well,
Do
sorry,
you think it's their benefit or for the benefit to regain that relationship back?
I'm not looking to regain the relationship.
Okay.
I think that's one of the big fakeries of
Mhm.
forgiveness. It's a sort
I
of,
wasn't
"I'll
sure when
forgive you and we're gonna be friends again." I didn't say
Right.
that. What I said is, "I'm going to forgive whoever has hurt me." And
Mhm.
when I started on this, and this is authentic, it's sort of a testimonial, really.
Right.
When I It's unbelievable the number of people in my life, I don't know about everybody else's life, but in my life, the number of people who have irritated me or abused me or ripped my carpet from underneath my feet. It's
Right.
quite incredible. But by engendering the spirit of forgiveness, what I'm doing is I am releasing myself of that fear, of
Okay.
that pain, that agony. The next thing is, and here's the crucial point, that in forgiving other people, I create within me the finest opportunity to forgive myself.
Mm.
Because most of us at 3 o'clock in the morning wake up with, what the heck was I doing?
Right.
And
Second guessing,
yeah, and now you get
rethinking,
into a lot of agony.
overthinking.
Mm,
Yes.
Not a happy place. So,
Self-imposed.
exactly. But here's another part to the puzzle. When we go back to what the girl, Irene, I think, Isla said at this in her speech,
Mhm.
she said, out of control.
Mhm.
This is a wonderful way of regaining control because I take the initiative. It's only with me. No one else can do it for me.
Right.
You can't forgive for me.
No.
I'm the only one who can do it. So I am now regaining control.
Mhm.
And where before I felt trapped, I no longer feel trapped.
Mm.
I am now free. I've not only liberated of the pain that that other individual has tried to put into my life, but I've also liberated myself of the faults that I have.
Mm.
So it's a two-way street at that point.
Yep.
And here's the other part to the real puzzle, I think, that when you have this sense of forgiveness, and I emphasize, not easy to do, let's not kid each other, but when you do it, what actually happens is your ability then to confront, if that's the word, but your
Mhm.
ability to come to grips with the CEO or the prime minister or whoever's actually misleading you, what actually happens is you no longer approach that individual in an emotional spirit.
Mm.
You're now coming together with them symbiotically. You're
Right.
coming to them and saying, something I want to talk to you about. You do it from a position of strength. You do
Mhm.
it from it's not as though you even need courage because that's already taken care of. It's a very, very profound position. And if I were to challenge all of us to look at the spirit of forgiveness, have you ever thought what that would mean across the world,
Mhm.
across the nation, across the communities, across our families, if in fact we engaged in this very actively promoted in the sense of forgiveness? I think that is how we immune ourselves from fear.
And I think
I rest my case.
thank you, Jeremy. Fantastic topic.
Thank you, Sarah.